Well, as you have discovered, Pneumanetics is an overview of important truths. We took some 18 very core truths that we have used in Global Training Network and developed this manual. And the whole idea was to take theological truth and turn it into therapeutic tools. And this particular manual has been used by scores and scores of people over the years. Now, as a word of explanation before we get into our topic for this time, I repeat myself and repeat exercises. For example, we just finished session 13, Building a Christian Identity, and we have you doing an exercise there that we also used in chapter 11 on a belief system. But it's so important that you do this, that repetition, as has been said, is good for the soul. So we'll start you in one place and then hone in on another place. We're not duplicating just for the sake of duplicating, but emphasizing. Now, this session 14 is what I dub AWOL parents. Now, if you've ever been in the service, you know that AWOL means absent without leave. And you can get put in the guardhouse for that. But we find tremendous problems in our society today that have accelerated over the years to the point that divorce today is one of the great tragedies of our society. It's also of note that no society has ever survived the breakdown of the family unit. It's true of America or any nation. And the usual family unit, the nuclear family is called, hardly exists anymore. Millions of kids are what we call latchkey kids. They come home after school, they take a bus or get home some way, let themselves in, lock themselves in, turn on the TV, and TV is their babysitter until either parent or both parents come home. In this day and age, usually just one parent comes home. I picked up some time ago a little article written by Irma Brombeck, who was one of my favorite writers, but she called it Daddy Doll, and it came out in the Reader's Digest many, many years ago. And I'd like to read it because I think it starts out and sets the tone for our topic today. When I was a little kid, our father was like the light in the refrigerator. Every house had one, but no one really knew what either of them did once the door was shut. My dad left the house every morning and always seemed glad to see everyone again at night. He opened a jar of pickles when no one else at home could. He was the only one in the house who wasn't afraid to go into the basement by himself. He cut himself shaving, but no one kissed it or got excited about it. It was understood that whenever it rained, he got the car and brought it around to the door. When anyone was sick, he went out to get the prescription filled. He kept busy enough. He set mouse traps. He cut the back roses so the thorns wouldn't snag you when you came in the front door. He oiled my roller skates, and they went faster. When I got my bike, he ran alongside of me for at least 1,000 miles till I got the hang of it. He signed all my report cards. Took a lot of pictures, but he was never in them. He tied up Mother's sagging clothesline every week or so. I was afraid of everyone else's father, but not my own. Once I made him some tea. It was only sugar water, but he sat on a small chair and said it was delicious. He looked very uncomfortable. Once I went fishing with him. I threw rocks in the water, and he threatened to throw me in after them. I wasn't sure he wouldn't do so, so I looked him in the eye for a whole year. I finally decided he was bluffing and threw in one more. He was a bad poker player. Whenever I played house, the mother doll had a lot to do. I never knew what to do with the daddy doll, so I had him say, "I'm going off to work now," and threw him under the bed. When I was 9 years old, my father didn't get up one morning to go to work. He went to the hospital and died the next day. There were a lot of people in the house who brought all kinds of good food and cakes. We never had so much company before. I went to my room and felt under the bed for my father doll. When I found him, I dusted him off and put him on my bed. He never did anything. I didn't know his leaving would hurt so much. It still does. Well, what is it that Bill Clinton, Jimmy Swaggart, and Prince Charles all have in common? More than you can imagine. There's an incredible cord that ties preacher, politician, and prince together. And what they share in common is what I call AWOL parents. In all cases, you will find in these cases that they were either ignored or overly adored by one spouse or the other, either mother or father. We know that Prince Charles was raised by nannies. His mother, of course, running England. But we would call in these cases the absent father syndrome. And that's what we used to call this study. Amazingly, you will find also that these men married exceptionally strong women. And you will find, and I've never met them, that they have a very strong mother-child relationship going into marriage. And interesting enough, these women will defend their husbands even though the husbands are unfaithful. It's a very interesting phenomenon, but it's a fact of life. In fact, it's such a fact of life that it's common throughout our society. Now, you almost wonder, is God the only one that hates divorce? He said in Malachi, "I hate divorce." That was God speaking. And yet, not talking just about the world or about the heathen, but in our evangelical circles, half of the marriages end in failure today. The ones that should be the strongest ones. For so long, the professionals disparaged marriage and the family unit and did their best to destroy it. And they almost succeeded until they awakened to the fact one day that what they were doing was totally wrong and have tried to set it right. They sowed the wind and reaped the whirlwind, unfortunately. Our trouble is America is no longer a bulwark for morality. We live in a hedonistic society. Well, I've already said half our marriage fails. The average lifespan of a marriage is 7 years. Children gun down children. There's a tremendous amount of abuse of children. Hundreds die each year from abuse. It's astounding. Thousands go to the abortionist, and unborn children are murdered by the tens of thousands. The real problem is not abortion. It's not one of pregnancy. It's time that we realize that America worships at the feet of the God of pleasure, and it's just as much idolatry as anything. And we see the results of it. Well, AWOL parents is an attempt to address this problem. Divorce creates its own dynamics, and it has its root in a person's belief system. Now, I had mentioned basic habit patterns and the tendency to produce in our generation what we lived up in the previous one, but divorced people are more likely to get divorces. Abused people are more likely to abuse. It's just a fact of life. We're now in the second generation, as it were, of a divorce culture. The boomer generation left a terrible legacy of broken homes and broken hearts. Most selfish generation in the history of our country. I've seen hundreds of hurting people over the years and dealt with hundreds and hundreds of people intent on getting divorces. And I've heard over and over again where people say that it's better for the children. Our constant fighting is hurting the children. Never in all my years of working with people have I ever heard a child encourage their parents to get divorced. Just the opposite. Their safety and their security is dashed. Not just with little people. I've counseled adults in their 30s that when their parents got a divorce, it devastated them. And they came in for help. How could this be? How could this happen? I worked for several months with a young man who was 32 years old, who was devastated by his parents' divorce. Couldn't handle it. The rock of stability, his parents, had suddenly gone. And he didn't know how to handle it. He didn't know what it meant to his own marriage. Well, this whole absent father and then absent mother thing came almost by accident. I was working with a young couple. They were having marital problems. And as I talked with the young wife, she told me whenever they experienced a physical relationship, afterwards she would get up and vomit, which didn't do much for his manhood. But the more I talked to her, the more she exhibited the symptoms and characteristics of a child in an incestuous relationship. And after I found out her background in the absence of a father there, it became quite clear that they had a father-child role going in the marriage, and that she had married a daddy. There were daddy needs to be met, and it was impacting their marriage in a very negative way. And so we had to move it around. Or she viewed her husband as a husband, not as a father. And one question I've asked people over the years, many people, what is the difference between a husband and a father other than sex? What is the difference between a mother and a wife other than sex? And people from this background who exhibit absent father, absent mother stuff can never answer that. And I ask them, if you don't know who you married or what you married, then what does your marriage consist of? And it is really something of the impact this has. And I've dubbed it fatherhunger. It's a dynamic that's extremely strong. A middle-aged wife of a nationally known pastor told me, she said, this drive is stronger than any narcotic. And she'd become involved in it with a younger man and started out so innocently. And yet the bonding and the ties were so strong. And I found in cases of this, the wife didn't care who knew about it or what. She jeopardized not only her reputation, but her husband's ministry. Didn't matter. Everything else paled into insignificance other than this relationship. And in working with him, it was always extremely difficult, because it was sort of like their last chance. But believe it or not, almost in every case, it was trying to fulfill daddy needs in their life. I had a young couple come in one time, and we talked, and the wife had gotten involved with an older man, 30 years her senior. And so as I talked to him and find out, it was a girl that did not have a good relationship with her daddy. She always wanted one, because of that, she had put him up on a pedestal, even though she didn't have a good relationship with him. And the thing is, one time, I asked the husband to describe his father-in-law, her dad, and he did. And then I asked, did they have a picture of this girl's supervisor, the man she was involved with? And he secured one. And it was a spitting image of her daddy. She'd fallen in love with a father figure. Happens all the time. Young girls out of absent father syndrome background, in this AWOL type of situation, are attracted to older men. And older men many times take advantage of this attraction. Little girls looking for daddy, and they're led astray by older men with many tragedies that have come out of that. Many men find themselves in compromising situations because a young girl is attracted to them, and the man does not realize it's a father-child attraction and succumbs. And an unguarded strength is a double weakness. And you'll hear me say that again and again. I remember talking with one little 19-year-old who was out of this background and who was quite promiscuous. And young girls, I have found from the absent father background, about half of them are very promiscuous. They're trying to find in one person what was denied them, or in many people, what was denied them by the one person. And this little girl, I tried to show her. She went up to a Christian college, and she came back and she said, "All men are alike." I said, "What do you mean?" Well, she had thrown herself at an older man up there, and he was tempted beyond, and it was unfortunate. It destroyed any work that I had done. You see, this father hunger is a very strong dynamic. It's extremely strong. And you have the role problem in marriages. And quite frankly, in marriages, I have found that the roles that are adopted in marriage really affect the marriage. I find that self-image and roles are two of the major causes of problems in marriage. You can have an absent father situation. Usually the girl is married a daddy-like figure, but you don't go to bed with daddy. I had one girl who didn't get married till in her late 30s. She married a man who was 67 years old, and he was a farmer. And on the wedding night, as he came to bed, she looked up and suddenly realized what she'd done, that she married a daddy. She got out of the other side and left, never came back. Not much we could do for that. She caught herself when it was almost too late. That marriage doomed to failure. The absent mother, the same way. We find young men trying to find in many women what we're denying him by the one. And all the tragedies. It goes back to what a person was and their belief systems in growing up. And because of the mores of our society today, we accept divorce as commonplace, like a cold. My generation, whether Christian or not, divorce wasn't contemplated. It just wasn't something that wasn't done. There was a stigma attached to it, and not today, unfortunately. And it's the children that become the victims. It's interesting. Studies have shown that the average father spends less than 7 minutes a day in meaningful time with their children. And it's a known fact also that little girls develop their femininity in contrast to their daddy's masculinity. And the reverse, the little boys develop their masculinity in contrast to the mother's femininity. But if the father is not there, how does that little girl's femininity develop? And so often they try to develop in relationship with other men. They don't relate well with other women, but they relate very well with men. And I've had many a person, many a girl tell me that I give my body just to be held for 15 minutes. She was never held by her father. What a tragedy. Young men, daddy's not there. They see the wife, the mother, making all the decisions. She's the head of the house. She has the greatest impact on that young lad's life. When men are wounded on the battlefield, they don't call for their daddy, they call for their mother. And so what you have here is young men not learning how to make decisions and learning the things they ought to do. And leadership in the home, they see nothing of it. There's no habit pattern set. And so what happens? They get married and the situation is repeated over and over again. And the consequences are terrible. Now, when does it begin? Well, when a child's old enough to begin to recognize that either daddy's not there, mother's not there. And of course, children internalize. They blame themselves. And so a daddy's gone for whatever the reason. He might be a good daddy, but he's gone. Our society demands it. He's trying to create his identity, improve his identity by what he does in his job. And so he's not at home. He's not spending time. And the indifference, the ignoring, is turned inside. And it sets in motion tremendously powerful emotional currents in the kid's life. I've talked to scores of young men who've been told they harbor latent homosexual feelings, and I tell them it's a bunch of baloney. What they have are emotional needs, not a sexual orientation. They never had a daddy. They want a daddy. They want that relationship. And again, it's very strong. I had a pastor come in, a very successful one. He was associate pastor of a very large church. He had done many evangelistic speaking. But his own background was that his father had divorced his wife, married a much younger nurse, had this child. And when he was born, his dad was 65 years old. His dad was a granddad. Never had any time for him. He was a physician. And it's very interesting. Now at 43, this man met an older homosexual in his 70s and developed a relationship with him. And I told him, you have a choice to make. You can opt for a gay lifestyle and lose your family and everything else. Or you can repent and get right with God. Unfortunately, he chose to follow the gay lifestyle. It was a tragic thing of that. But it shows the impact of the absence of a father. He had substituted a father. Now, he wasn't a homosexual, though he had told he was. He had an emotional need. He just tried to fulfill it in the wrong manner. I was speaking in another state to a group of college students. And when I talked on the absent father and the father God concept and all of that, this 19-year-old girl, freshman in the university there, came up to me and she says, for the first time I understand my own emotional needs and what I'm doing. And I said, what do you mean? And she told me, she said, well, I've been sleeping with an older man. He's 52 years old. And I realized that I was looking for a daddy. He was looking for sex. And she said, I knew it was wrong. Now I know why it was wrong. And so she began to put it together that her emotional needs were being met in the wrong way. The impact of the father is tremendous. One of the most bizarre cases I ever had, I still marvel at it. As I counsel so often, when I see the person that's coming in, I make a mental picture of what I believe they have come in for. And there was this young girl who came in. She was quite pretty. And I thought to myself, now this girl has marriage problems, probably sings in the choir, probably has a couple children, and she can't get her husband to come in, but she's coming in to get things settled. How wrong I was. The receptionist showed her in, and she looked at me very flippantly, or said very flippantly and very seductively, I've slept with 30 men this past month. I think I have a problem. And I told her she did indeed have a problem. I said, about as bad a problem as I ever found. And she said, but don't give me this Jesus stuff. I don't want any of this Jesus stuff. And I said, well, that's fine. I won't give you any Jesus stuff, nor will I see you. And I showed her out. I refused to see her. She didn't want to talk about Jesus. I didn't have anything else to tell her. Well, I didn't know at the time she was the talk of the swinging single set in Oklahoma City. About a year later, a little over a year, she called me. Said, I need to see you. I said, I'm sorry, but I told you before I wouldn't see you. She says, no, I really want to talk about this Jesus stuff. And I said, okay. I have just the person you need to see. So I went and sent one of the staff girls. And the staff girl met with her. And the girl, by this time, God had worked in her life. And she made a genuine commitment to Christ. It was a marvelous conversion. Well, she came in, and so I said I'd see her. Now, I've said before, when I say this, I saw her so on. In cases where there's opposite sex, you always have somebody else sitting in. You don't see them individually. And certainly not a situation like this. Well, when she grew up, her father, as she related to me, was a fanatic. He's a religious fanatic. The Bible said that men shouldn't touch a woman. And this man never touched this daughter. She said, I used to dream of running and jumping up in his lap, but I knew he'd throw me across the room. And so she grew up with this tremendous father hunger developing in her life. And so she began to try to find in many, many men what was denied her by the one. And to the point, as she related to me, she'd had over 400 partners in 1 year. I asked her, do you have time for anything else? There was no satisfaction in that. She was looking for something and not finding it. But she grew by leaps and bounds. And it was really wonderful to see how God began to get her emotional life straight and her spiritual life straight and all of this. A year after she was, as she had trusted the Lord, she decided to have a spiritual birthday party. Now, there's a little rabbit trail in this whole thing, but it's interesting because it shows the hand of God. So she invited all of her non-Christian friends out. And there were about 200 of them. It was almost like a block party. Now, this young girl had 2 small children, 1 4, 1 2. And while everybody was there intermingling and so on, for some unknown reason, nobody knows to this day, but the neighbor's gate somehow was ajar, and the 4-year-old slipped in and fell in the swimming pool. And when they discovered her missing and found her in the swimming pool, it had been about 20 minutes. And they pulled her out, lifeless, face blue. And a doctor who had attended the party examined her and said, and got her breathing again, said, this baby can't survive, and if it does, it'll be a vegetable. And this little mother cried out and said, God didn't save me to take my child. And she made all of them. And most of these people were non-Christians. And she had shared her testimony. She made them get down. Kneel down right there, outside. And she prayed, God, save my child. Save my child. Well, it had been rushed to the hospital. Returned next morning with no evidence of anything being wrong. God's hand had touched that. About a week later, somebody came in my office, out of breath, demanding that they see me. And I said, well, what do you want? She said, I want what so-and-so has. I want what so-and-so has. I said, do you know her? She said, yes, she's a friend. Well, I found out this girl and this other one were in competition for men. So I want what she has. Well, this girl had gotten deeply involved in the occult. And we went through a tremendous battle there as she fought to find Christ and as Satan fought to keep. And there was such a decidedly demonic presence there. But finally there was victory. And she found Christ because of the other girl. And I've kept up until recently with the other one. But this girl that came in afterwards, I saw her a year later at a restaurant out at the state capitol. And she looked up and said, hi. And she said, I want you to know I'm serving Jesus every day of my life. Well, this is things that make the world go round for those of us in dealing with people, as anyone will tell you. The thing is that we need to learn Jesus didn't come to prepare us to die, though he does, but to prepare us to live. I've come that you might have life and life more abundantly. And he does because he changes our lives. He changes us. So it's an astounding thing. Now there's a deeper thread that runs through this whole thing. And I said before that on major truth or major doctrine, Satan brings confusion. He wants to confuse the issue. Well, that's true about Father, because I have found and discovered that most people have a perception of God as Father based upon their earthly father. You say, how can you do that? How can you say that? Well, it all came about one time as a person came in for counseling, and I just, I don't know why I did it. I had her write out who her father was to her as a person. And so she did. And later on, I had her write out who God was to her as a person. She wrote the same thing, almost identical. And then sometime later, I write out who the Father was to her as a person. And oh, the invective she used. He's a liar, a sneak, a thief. And I said, wait a minute. Things are not gelling up. She has a very poor perception of Father, yet in her mind, God and her Father are basically the same. So I began to take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of surveys over the next 2-3 years. And I found basically the same. 85% of all Christians have an erroneous or warped concept of God as Father. They base it upon their earthly father. And do you see the fine hand of Satan in this? Create a situation where your perception of your own relationship with your daddy could be bad, abusive, distant, and so on, and that's what God becomes to us. My own dad was a fine guy, but I never knew him. He invented passivity. My mother ran the family. She was stronger than an acre of garlic, but my dad didn't. Well, I found out later his mother died when he was 5, raised by 2 older sisters. But he was passive, he was distant. And I grew up with a perception that God was 10 million light years away. No way to know him. I had a perception that he was the cosmic policeman. It was strange. I realized this later. And remember, we begin building a concept of God when we're very, very young. Every child has a concept of God of one way or another. And then that's where Satan comes in and begins to warp that perception. And of course, if we don't know the Bible, which is the really true revelation of God, there's no way we can really know God and who he is. The Father has become the forgotten member of the Trinity. We know God the Son, he's our friend. We know that the Holy Spirit is active, but who's the Father? Now, I was speaking to a group of students down at the University of Texas again. I mentioned that, and it was one of my favorite things. And I traveled about 50 campuses a year, and so I'd go back and year after year. But this one time we were all gathered together there, and I would always love to tell stories about my relationship with my daughter, Christy. After I was one of 3 boys, and I had 4 boys, finally had this little girl. We named her Christina, which means gift from God, because the doctor had told me that my chances of having a baby girl, 1 in 5 million, and as I told the doctor, I didn't care whether it was a boy or girl, but it would wear skirts till it was 18, regardless. But anyway, as I shared these stories with this one girl, who was a staff girl with this ministry that worked on campus, would rush out of the room. And I always thought something, she had something to do. But later on, a couple of the girls came to me and said, every time you speak, this girl gets physically ill. And I said, I've had that trouble over the years. No, we're serious. She really does. She gets so sick, she begins to hemorrhage. Said, there's something wrong here. So I pulled her aside, and we began to talk. And I asked her about God the Father. She said, Jesus is enough. I don't need the Father. I need Jesus. That's all I need. Oh, she was vehement. And I said, well, tell me about your family. So she did. And what she didn't say about her father told me a great deal about her father. She never mentioned him, wouldn't talk about him. So I slowly, over a period of time, drew it out. The man was I know he wasn't an idiot, but he was a maniac. He tried to kill the mother on several occasions, hated the mother. And her most vivid memory was one evening, the father taking a butcher knife to the mother, and she was screaming, there was blood, and this little girl and her older sister, were witness to all this. Police came and took him away and so on. And she had taken such an emotional dislike and revulsion at father, even the word father. But the idea of God the Father was more than she could bear. Now, as we met, I noticed that I had seen her a number of months before, but she put on weight. And not that it was unattractive, but she was much heavier by 20 or 25 pounds than she had been before. And then I found out she'd gotten engaged. And it was one of those situations where a man was also in the ministry, and they were young, and they were much in love. And one time in a group of girls, they said, you're so lucky. He'll be a great husband. And then somebody chimed in and said, and he'll be an excellent father. And the next day, she broke the engagement. She could handle him as a lover and as a fiance and a potential husband, but she could not handle him as a father. And she dropped, and she began to put on weight to make herself unattractive. And so we began to work, knowing God as Father, one of the major thrusts of our ministry. And the absent father, this father-hunger dynamic, had made God a stranger to her. Psalms 10, verse 9, or is it 9, verse 10, one or the other. Look it up. Those who know my name will put their trust in me. If you don't know him, you don't trust a stranger. And if God's a stranger, you won't trust him. And that had been her problem. She didn't know him. And was it affecting her Christian walk? Here she was in a Christian ministry. Well, certainly. It was affecting it terribly. Let me explain how this occurs. Paul in 1 Corinthians 8, and I've referred to this before, he points out that the strong Christian is a strong Christian because of their knowledge of God, which strengthens their faith and their conscience, and a weak Christian is one who doesn't have the knowledge of God or the same knowledge of God, therefore their conscience and their faith is weak. Well, if it's the knowledge of God, it's the knowledge of God as Father. John 1:18, Jesus came to reveal the Father. In John 14, Philip said, just show us the Father and that will suffice. That's all we ask. Lord, you show us the Father. And Jesus said, Philip, have I been with you so long that you don't know that I and the Father are one? He that has seen me has seen the Father. And I might add, as she came into the knowledge of God as Father, it revolutionized her life. Later on the semester, she got married. She renewed her acquaintance and then engagement, and they got married. You see, Father was no longer something to be afraid of, something to be enjoyed. And it's tragedy that so many Christians have no knowledge of God as Father. And see, and Christians get mad when I say this. A person can know Christ and know him well and not know God as Father. That was more true in my case. You can know Jesus and not know the Father. That means that your Christian life is incomplete. It means that it can't be fulfilled. And so it is a need, a demand that can revolutionize your life. And I'll talk more about this when we get into the session of the Abba Father, and then the next one, God for All Season. But let me remind you, this AWOL situation doesn't just affect little girls. It affects little boys too, whether they're little by age or maturity or whatever. Now, Dr. Robert McGee, good friend of mine, he and Marilyn are personal friends. And we go way back. He wouldn't want to tell me to tell you how far back we go. But he says this: my father was an invalid as I grew up. He had a diabetic problem. I learned to go out and entertain myself. My brother also had health problems. As a result, I cannot remember my father ever going out and playing with me. Now that I've become a father myself, I discovered that it was beyond my experience to sit down and play with my own children. I realized how I had patterned my life after the life of my father. I had to go through my own private learning curve to be able to do something I'd never seen my father do. It is something. Now, I'm a personal experience of this because at one time, Sandy, whose name is I call him, Dr. McGee, lived in a very large apartment complex that had a great big play area of many acres, several acres, probably 4 or 5 acres. And I would go out there and I'd see his little boy all by himself playing out there with nobody else around. I'd go up to him and I'd chat with him. And Robert and I'd talk about it. And Robert learned. The one thing that Robert and I don't have in common is that he's smart. And he learned. I had an experience that also, when I was 13, my father became an alcoholic. And from that moment on, now I want to hasten to say that it didn't last a whole long time. My mother forced him to take a cure, and he did, and he never had another drink in his life. But there for very crucial period of my own life, he was an alcoholic. And and especially the years when I was 12, 13, 14, junior high, going into high school. Well, it was very interesting. I believed, as my boys came along, that I was a good father. And until my oldest boy became 13. And I then had this strange feeling I didn't know what I was doing. Now, we'll talk about that more in a moment.